Some of the most important ideas we found in The Devil of Tom Walker are greed, manipulation, abusive relationships, and regret for actions.
Here we have our classmate Ocean. Ocean, what does greed mean to you?
When I think of greed, I think of money, and I think of individuals who, do bad things just for the benefit of their own self and their own success. So.
Here we have our classmate Leah. What does manipulation mean to you?
Manipulation means to me someone tricking someone into doing something else.
Here we have Ashlyn. Ashlyn, what does abusive relationships mean to you?
To me, abusive relationships mean when your partner breaks your boundaries and takes advantage of you.
Here's our classmate Camilla. Camilla, what do you think of when you think of regret for actions?
Making amends with the people that you hurt during your actions.
Greed is displayed in the short story when Walker cares more about his properties than his wife. This is important because it shows how greed can lead to pushing loved ones aside for the desire of more economic prosperity. For our quote about greed, Irving says, "Let us get a hold of the property," said he, consolingly to himself, "and we will endeavor to do without the woman." The context of this quote is when Tom Walker goes out to find his wife when she goes to make a deal with the devil. His wife doesn't come back, and Walker gets suspicious. He goes into the forest and finds some of his belongings, and in doing so, he can't find his wife. But in this quote, Walker does not care about his wife, and he only cares about the materialistic property. This shows how Walker is full of greed and doesn't really care about the people and things in his life besides the materialistic stuff.
Manipulation is shown when Walker becomes a usurer and accumulates bonds and mortgages from financially suffering customers. This is important because it displays how the desire for economic growth and power can lead people to abuse and ruin other people's lives for their own personal profit.
For our manipulation quote, Irving says, "He was on the point of foreclosing a mortgage by which he would complete the ruin of an unlucky land speculator for whom he had professed the greatest friendship." The context of this quote is when the devil and Tom Walker made a deal. In this deal, Tom Walker wanted to be economically prosperous, where he sold his soul and decided to become a usurer, where he was going to manipulate and use friends and customers. In this quote, Tom Walker is using his friend and is ruining his friendship with this person just so he can manipulate him and make more money for himself. Tom Walker doesn't care about his friends, and this is displayed here in this quote, where he manipulates them and uses them. Abusive relationships are displayed in this short story when Walker and his wife get into verbal and physical fights. This is important because it shows how abuse and altercations can lead to poor decisions and bad actions that can cause further abuse, which is shown in the short story. In our quote for abusive relationships, Irving says about Mrs. Walker, "Her voice was often heard in wordy affair with her husband, and his face sometimes showed signs that their conflicts were not confined to words." This context is how the short story introduces us to the relationship between Tom Walker and his wife. This shows that they were abusive to each other and that they both fought often. And this is important in the context of the story because it shows why Walker and his wife both want to make a deal with the devil to improve both of their lifestyles. And this shows how they're both abusive.
Regret for action is shown in the story when Walker regrets selling his soul, which results in him carrying a Bible everywhere to show his repentance. This is important because it shows that people do not fully contemplate their decisions before committing an action, and therefore they must deal with the consequences.
For our regret for actions quote, Irving says, "Tom had a lurking dread that the devil, after all, would have his due, that he might not be taken unawares. Therefore, it is said he always carried a small Bible in his coat pocket." The context for this quote is that Tom Walker already experienced all of the economic prosperity in his life and that he is now growing old. With experiencing all these good things in his life, Tom is starting to grow old and worries about the devil because he sold his soul to him. Tom then worries that he's going to be sent to hell, and he carries a Bible around. This shows his regret for his actions and that he's scared of the consequences that are going to come from his actions. All these ideas appear in today's world and have important impacts.
Greed is shown throughout current day life in certain aspects of politics. Some politicians want personal prosperity instead of finding the common good for people of the world. This is important because it shows how money and prosperity can cause people to only care about themselves.
Manipulation is shown in big corporations like Amazon, where they use the workers for cheap labor for greater profit. This is important because it shows how big companies will exploit people for the greatest profit possible, without regard for the person's well-being and life.
Abusive relationships are shown in the high divorce rates, where over all of 50% of U.S. marriages result in divorce. This is important because it displays how one must marry because of mutual love and interests, and not off of surface-level attraction.
And lastly, regret for actions is shown in current days with people like Henry Ruggs, who drank and drove and killed a woman. This is important because he is experiencing regret for the decisions he made due to a poor decision, and he is now suffering the consequences. If one always makes the best decisions for one's future well-being, one finds himself avoiding bad consequences. These ideas are important because they teach us valuable lessons that we need to know. Greed and manipulation teach us to do the right thing and not to fall into temptation of exploiting people.
Abusive relationships and regret for actions teaches us to stay away from toxic people, places, and things, and to make the right decisions so we do not suffer the consequences later.